I was born on December 8, 1923, in our farmhouse. I was told by my parents in the midst of the night. And usually midwife stayed with the mother for a few days. And in those days, midwives were treated like sister to all the ladies who gave birth. They were highly respected and loved as if they were part of the family. And I remember as a child her coming from time to time, and in her medical bag she carried candies for the children she delivered. We had in the kitchen fireplace, and out of firewood I built structures such as bridges and houses. And one time I fell accidentally and broke my collarbone. And I never told my parents about it, and it healed quite well. And on another occasion I fell and I broke one of my ribs. I fell on one of those structures that I built, and I was ashamed to admit that I had pain. And again the rib healed perfectly without any medical attention. My mother died when I was about 3 years old, and I don't remember much of her except one day she had visiting ladies with her for tea, and they were talking, and I was playing in a sandbox, and I soiled the cup that I had with the sand, and I showed it to my mother, and she wasn't too happy about it. That's all I remember. And then I remember her funeral very slightly. First of all, I remember the casket in which she was buried. At that time there were no funeral homes, but the person's home as a funeral home. Her casket was put in the living room of our farmhouse, and she died delivering early my little brother. And the baby died also, and both of them were in the casket. And I remember my father showing me my mother's body and my little brother's body. And I remember that I cried terribly, ran into the pantry in our home, and cried there until I felt pain in my throat. And our maid came to me and tried to console me. We had a young maid that was very loving and kind. I remember her. So after my mother was buried, she took care of me and showed me a lot of love and kindness. And I never forgot about her. Every time I had a chance, I used to visit her later on when my father remarried. And I remember the day my father remarried. That was about a year or two after my mother's death. And the people later on told me, when I saw my father at the reception and his new bride, I said to him, "Father, have you already gotten married?" I don't remember saying this, but the people told me that. That's what I said to my father. And I grew up with my stepmother, who was very kind to me. And she and my father had 9 children. My sister, who is next to me, is still alive. And then the next sister. So there were 6 sisters in my family and 4 of us sons. I was the older, of course, of all. And I remember attending the church with my father and my stepmother. They were very faithful Catholics and attending our parish church every Sunday and every holiday. And I was fascinated by church services. It was a Baroque church, beautifully decorated. Had main altar and through 2 other altars on each side. And I always remember in the summer a lot of flowers. And the church was always permeated with the smell of flowers and candles burning on the altar. And we, in our home, always had a large candle, about 2 inches in diameter, made of real beeswax. And when my mother was dying, she asked for me, and my father brought me to my mother's bedside, and she wanted to bless me before she expired. And I remember that when she was expiring, she held a candle, lit candle. That was a tradition in Polish culture, that each child was given a candle when the child was born. And the candle was lit during the baptism. And that candle would go with the child for First Holy Communion, for confirmation, for marriage, and whatnot, all the sacraments. We didn't have buses the way the children have now. We had to walk with other children from the village to and from. We always walked in a group. It was about 3 miles, if not 4. The school district was growing very rapidly, so the main school building did not accommodate all the children. So in my case, I attended classes in a building that belonged to a Jewish family called Ehrlich. There wasn't much of a schoolyard, but the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade were held in this building that the school district rented from the private owner. We had about 50% of Jewish boys and girls. We went to school 6 days a week, including Saturdays. And many a time, hostilities developed between Jewish boys and Christian boys. Many a time over the fact that the Jewish boys disapprove pork in our lunches, kielbasa, ham. And they always laughed at us that we eat impure food. So boys would get angry and grab a piece of kielbasa and try to push a Jewish boy's mouth. And they were quite unhappy about that. We had fights from time to time, nothing serious. When I finished my 3rd grade, my father and stepmother and the whole family moved to my paternal grandmother's farm, which was larger and more fertile, to the village of Jezory. In a new school, I attended school with a number of my cousins. My uncle Władysław's sons and my uncle Frank's sons. The family had a very high reputation in the school district because the children from our families were treated special. And as soon as I was in the 5th grade, many a time, the principal lady, Miss Podolska, would come to the class and call me out and send me to lower classes to teach when the teachers got ill. And I was amazed at this, and it continued throughout the 5th, the 6th, the 7th grade. And I enjoyed teaching. I learned how to control the class and to teach, and that very much appealed to me. They emphasize science quite a bit. And we had a laboratory. And in that elementary school, I learned to make homemade battery that generated electricity to operate doorbell. I also learned dry distillation of coal. That appealed to me tremendously. I tried to do it at home myself on my own after I learned in school. And at that time, the instruction in physics and chemistry stimulated my mind to attempt some inventions. And one of my inventions I designed in my copybook was a prototype of a helicopter. So this was, I thought, very imaginative for the kid in elementary school and the teachers who taught physics to stimulate us to think about such things. Another thing which I thought I discovered was to create a boat with fins on the side when the boat will reach certain speed. So my mind was constantly preoccupied with creativity. And at that time I also was stimulated in the classes of history to collect pictures of kings and important persons in literature and history of Poland. And also started to collect stamps. And there were only 2 of us in the class that collected stamps and collected pictures of kings and princes from the early history of the country. The teachers of the Polish language had such an impact on us that they hooked us up on reading very early. So a group of us read continuously. And when our parents went for the periodically to get a report on their students, our parents were always told that we are reading too much. So much so that we read all the books that interested us in the school library and went to the public library already in grade school and read classics in Polish translation of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, read French classics, English classic, and also the administration of the library became excited about us reading so much. So in free time, they asked us to come and help in cataloging the books that were coming to the library. And also, the education in our school was such that in elementary school, in practical classes, we were taught how to bind books. So the school and the public library didn't have to hire anybody, but the students did the binding, professional binding. We had very simple equipment, and I learned how to bind books, which if I couldn't do anything else to support myself, I can open up a business even today and bind books from scratch, which was, I thought, very providential and also forward education that I wish in other schools, in other countries, they do such things. Then I made my own skis out of a tree that we call locust. We call it in Poland acacia. It's a hardwood and a very dense composition, so it slides easily. At that time in Poland, high school education was not compulsory, and the level of education was rather high. Students had to study Latin, Greek, French or German, and of course Polish literature, history of literature, the writers. And the examination was rather strict. For one reason or another, there was a pressure to keep farm boys on the farm rather than have them move to the cities and get professions. The war was coming in 1939, and about a year before the war, there was a lot of propaganda on the part of the Nazis in Germany and aggression. They attacked Austria and then Czechoslovakia, and they were predicting that they would attack Poland. At that time, there was a war spirit. The Polish government was bragging that they could cope with the Nazis and overpower them and all that. But actually, the Polish government didn't have much resources except manpower. They lacked tanks and airplanes. And so when the war broke out, my cousin John and his friend decided to and myself decided to join Polish army on the night of September 1st, 1939. Two women came at night to our village and shouted on the top of the voice that the Nazi tanks were already in the city near us, west of us. And they disappeared. So we got up about 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. And my father and I dug a hole in our farmyard to hide the most precious things in the family, some clothing and some extra food, that in case artillery fire may wipe the village out, we may have something to depend on. And then my older first cousin, John Mazgaj, and his friend by the name Kos, and I got our blankets and some food, and we wanted to go to the military base to volunteer to fight the Nazis. By the time we went there in the morning, the troops were already sent to the front. And there was just only a skeleton military force that told us he had no authority to enlist us. We should go east and try to join the Polish army there. So we went east, and wherever we met Polish units. Some of them had uniforms but no weapons. Some of them had weapons but no uniforms. Some of them had just military hats and civilian clothing, and told us we have no authority to enlist anybody. So we kept going further east towards the Russian border until the Nazi tanks caught up with us. And we were in a village. And people were moving from the village, packing their belongings on their farm wagons and moving to the forest nearby. And we say, we don't have to go there. We stayed. Everybody left, except our group stayed in the village. And the Nazi aircraft flew over the following day. By the time we decided to move to the forest, to the fields, the aircraft flew, decided to machine gun everybody that moved anywhere. So only through the grace of God and the depth of the furrows between the rows of potatoes, we kept safe and managed to survive. Some died, and we went to the forest. And most of the trees in the forest were cut in half by artillery also. And from that time on, we saw no need to go east any further, to return home. And as we were returning home, we saw the Nazi power, the modern tanks, the trucks, motorcycles. Polish equipment was no match for them. They were all organized, disciplined, moving fast, and didn't bother civilians moving in the opposite direction. So we came home. We stopped in a city nearby, to inquire if our village was safe. And they said, yes, it's safe. Only a few artillery shells exploded near the village. But the city where I went to first, second, and third grade, the city of Orszak, was burned to the ground. And a lot of Nazis died in that battle. A lot of Polish troops died in that battle. Polish civilians took the bodies of Polish soldiers and German soldiers and buried them there, put crosses and the names that they had on their dog tags. So at first, the Nazis didn't much bother us in the rural areas. They stationed in larger cities. And soon their SS units came and Gestapo units came to start controlling the countryside as well. And the first thing they did was to summon all the people from each village to have a picture taken, fingerprints, and given identification card. So we had to submit ourselves to that. Then they asked to give up radios, hunting weapons. And soon they imposed quotas on farmers to deliver so much grain, potatoes, hogs, cattle to the Nazi points where the delivery took place at storage areas. They started to arrest after they were given us IDs. And in the ID, they had a level of education. So the Gestapo and SS were interested in people that were educated, college educated, teachers, priests, professors, politicians, scientists. And they started to arrest them because on that ID, there was a Nazi eagle, and in the eagle's talons, there was a wreath of laurels or something. And in the middle of that wreath, there was a number that no one paid much attention to. But to the Nazis, that number meant as to who is to be arrested, whether he got in trouble or not. So many a time they will come to the town, surround the town, close the streets and identify the people. And if somebody appeared with the ID, they look on that number there. Number one was the most dangerous, the highest educated people that were to be potential enemies of the Nazis. They were arrested, sent to prisons for interrogation, and eventually Auschwitz opened up and they were sent there for extermination. At that time, we already started to get organized. And people were extremely depressed because they felt that the war is going to last a little bit longer than they thought. So, in our area, a group of educators and a gentleman named Władysław Jasiński, a lawyer and a teacher, his father was professor of literature, Polish literature. And he decided to organize a newspaper called Odwet in Polish, which means a revenge. And in that newspaper, they tried to lift up the spirit of the Polish people. So his father and many other professors who were good writers wrote uplifting articles. And also, they listened to the news from BBC in London. And anytime they had something that the Nazis were losing in areas of the world, they would print. And I got involved and sworn into distribution of this newspaper. Our neighbor's son, who was a college student, came to me one day. I was picking up cherries behind our barn, and he came to talk to me for a moment. And he says, I have something to tell you, but you have to make an oath that you will not tell anybody what I'm going to tell you. So I took the oath, and he told me, I'm a member of the underground newspaper, and we need you to carry the stencils from one point of production to another point, and also to carry newspapers to parish rectories, to priests, and to contacts in different towns and villages. So I had a bicycle, and he had his father's automatic pistol, French, made in Belgium, Fabrique Nationale pistol, which is a very dependable, one of the finest arm producers in Europe, Fabrique Nationale, FN. And he always gave me that pistol to carry on me. And most of us had cyanide in case that we got arrested. We'd take the cyanide so we wouldn't divulge anything to the Nazis. I never carried cyanide, so I always resented killing myself by my own hand, suicide. But I carried the pistol. And I got involved and had an area of distribution. And in the time when my father didn't need me too much on the farm, I would ride bicycle and deliver stencils and deliver newspapers. And we had points also where we collected intelligence information about the Nazi movements for the West. By that time, we already had contact with London. And we would carry information. And usually we had the artillery casing in the ground on a certain angle, under a tree, pine tree, for instance, and was covered with leaves, and we would slip that information there. We never knew who delivered, we never knew who took out, for safety's sake. So I got deeply involved in the distribution of the secret newspaper. And fortunately, I was never caught. One time I came across the Nazis in the town that I went to grade school. I drove fast and I entered the marketplace. full of Nazis, going from store to store looking for something. And I carried my pistol on me, carried stencils to another point. And the Nazis were everywhere, so I had to drive my bicycle ride my bicycle not to hit anybody. And I just smiled, slowed down, kept calm, smiled at them, and they let me go. So on the way back, the Nazis were gone, and some of my former classmates said, "Marian, how did you do that?" They knew what happened because some of the people saw me ride. And that was very close, very close. So once the newspaper work developed tremendously well, people were reading, the Nazis were furious because they couldn't catch. But in one instance, they got some spies, liquidated one of our points of production. A young lady who was a typist, and 3 men that worked there fought to the very end, so much so that they had to set fire with their tracer bullets to the house, and they all burned there. Then we felt the time has been coming to attack the Nazis. So nationally, underground army was organized. And we had training, mostly in forests, with weaponry, rifles, pistols, machine guns, submachine guns, hand grenades. And I got involved in it. I felt that time has come for us to attack the Nazis with arms. But first, when the Nazis started war against the Soviet Union, and the troops are moving east in trucks, we destroyed the signs on the road. One night, all the signs that the Nazis had for their troops to direct them east disappeared. We destroyed them. Also, we destroyed their road reparation equipment. We siphoned their gasoline to make Molotov's cocktail. We had a production of 1/4 of a gallon bottles filled with gas, and our chemists produced chemicals that were glued to the paper and glued around the bottle. And when the bottle would break, we threw the bottles against the tanks or against the trucks. The chemical connected with gas exploded into flame. So the Nazis were trying to protect themselves as much as they could, and they had spies. Then we were able to, with the support of the population, to eliminate the spies. Then we started to blow up bridges, railroads, warehouses. Also, liquidate the warehouses where they kept grain, where the farmers delivered grain. Also destroyed their points of production of butter and cheese. And the farmers got smart. The Nazis had officials go from farm to farm and number all the cows, all the pigs, and give them an earring. So the farmers learned to remove the earring and put in a smaller hog and butchered that large one for the family. So after the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, we were able to disarm some of the soldiers, take their weapons, submachine guns, pistols. And they also had some Italian soldiers that Mussolini gave to Hitler to fight in the Eastern Front. And the Italians, unlike the Germans, were very friendly to the Polish population. And all the college and high school educated Poles that knew Latin could communicate with the Italians. And we were able to buy udus of weapons from the Italians because they didn't care much to go to the front. And some of them defected, and we enabled them to defect, provide their civilian clothing. They could return to Italy. And of course, by that time, by 1943, our units were already the size of battalions and size of regiments. And we started to receive airdrops from England, American and British weapons were coming from the sky. We had communication, and we had people by that time going across the border from Germany, from France to England. And so also we had a code. We listened to BBC broadcasts and to the music, and certain songs had a meaning to us, telling us exactly where the next airdrop is going to be, when. So we would secure the area of the airdrop, mostly in the farm area. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, we could hear the airplane high above, and the Nazi searchlights, and sometimes shooting. They would come lower and drop in containers out of tin, huge containers from here to the steps, and about that in diameter. Machine guns, submachine guns, hand grenades, ammunition, medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, uniforms, shirts, shoes. Pistols. And we are being equipped at that time, were being equipped at that time almost as well as the enemy. So we hid those weapons in underground hiding places or in barns. And then at the the end of 1943, beginning of 1944, we already attacked Nazis in the country, so much so that they never dared to come into the countryside. They might have been going through. If they went units, they disappeared. And they only stayed in the cities overnight. And then, at the end of 1944, we were so strong that we attacked Nazi regiments with our regiments. Forests were the areas where we were hiding, lived in tents. And most of us were dressed in British uniforms, British shoes. And we had anti-tank weapons, plastic for the explosives and all that. The Germans were already warned by somebody before that we were to attack them. Instead of being in the barrack, as they usually were, they were outside in the positions ready to fire. So our men could not get into the barrack and disarm the Germans. They had sandbags protecting them and screens on the windows so we couldn't throw hand grenades into the side. So they had to pull through the bridge. And by the time the German machine gun stopped, I could crawl and join the rest of them across the bridge. It was too late. The Germans were already on the bridge. So I swam across the river, wearing pistol, 2 hand grenades, and 5 kilos of explosives on my belt, and military boots. And I swam. And the Germans from the bridge noticed that I was there. They fired flares and submachine gunned me. And I swam. And there was time that I lost all energy, kicked the boots off, dropped my rifle, and still my winter coat was soaked, pulled me down, and I started to drown. And I remembered that a lady gave all of us in our unit little pictures of Our Lady. It was called Our Lady of Exiles. And I had it in my wallet. And when I started to drown, all of a sudden I thought about that holy picture I had in my wallet. And I started to pray. My life came before my eyes, in a sense. I had no fear, rather a blissful experience. But I wonder, why should I die at such a young age? I was about 16, 17 at that time. And all of a sudden, I got a strength, a new strength. Started to push up from the bottom of the river. Came up, got some air. And I always was good swimming on the back. Much better than swimming on my front. And I started to swim with the current. The water carried me further and further and further. I just moved from time to time. And I came to a place that looked like a little island in the middle of the river. I took my socks off. And on that island, there was a lot of wicker growing there. The men that make wicker baskets were cutting. And they cut usually askew. So I had to walk, and I walk on those things, and I wounded my feet. So I was very careful, and all of a sudden, I found a little path. And I said, this couldn't be an island and a path, perhaps fishermen made it. And I walked along the path, and it appeared to be, in reality, a semicolon. So I walked to the land. And the Nazis were firing against our men, and our men were firing against them. And I learned later on, a help came to the Nazis from another city. And they took the other Nazis for us and fired at the Nazis, and Nazis fired at the Nazis. And flares were going up, and I ran into the fields. And I came to a single farmhouse in the field, about a mile away from the place. And there was light in one of the windows. By the time I came to the window to ask for help, the light went off. So I knocked on the window, no one answered for a while. And then a woman's voice came and said, "Sir, I'm afraid to open. I'm afraid to open. Go somewhere else." At the same time, another window opened up in the same part, at the other end of the building, and said, "Sir, I am a legionnaire, veteran. Come to my door." I went there. He and his wife stripped me totally, gave me new shirt, new underwear, new shoes. She started to boil something hot for me to drink, put me in their bed, covered me with a quilt. They said, "Rest for a moment." So I rested, warmed up. They gave me hot drink to drink. They gave me top coat and a hat. And they said, "We're going to take you to our cousin that lives even further from the city that you were fighting in." So he got his horses and a wagon ready, put me on the wagon, and we rode about 2 or 3 miles and came to a very secluded farm in the fields. The cousin opened the door, took me in. The first one returned. It was already about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning by that time. They put me in bed, covered me with blankets. I slept, exhausted. When I woke up, I smelled chicken, soup being cooked. That's a true story. So soon, the lady and her daughter, teenage daughter, came to the bedroom with a tray, bread and chicken noodle soup. I ate. And the man said to me, "I already contacted the commanding officer of Home Army, Underground Army, about your presence here. They are going to come take you back to your unit." So, as he took me, he came, talked to me, and took me. we went to the city of Połaniec, from which my ancestors came in the first place, and we met two other men that also survive in similar situation. And we traveled by horse and wagon to our unit that was stationed in a manor away from there. When the guard saw me, he almost fell to the ground. Marian, everybody was convinced that you died, that you were shot. Everybody was swearing that they saw you fall. It was a lot of jubilation, a lot of surprise. I really came close, because he was firing at me like from here to this chair. That's the distance. And that's how I fired too. The light of the explosions of the gun was firing, was blinding my eyes. That was an experience. I wrote about it in one of the books. We had a fight with the Germans in 1944. Our positions were here. The German positions were on the other side. And the Germans had a good observation point from their side, from that windmill. At first we didn't pay much attention to it, but then we started to figure out what was going on. I was behind my machine gun, MG-42, and my ammunition man was on my right side, laying on the ground. We got fire from the Nazi side, and we fired back, and all of a sudden, a fellow machine gunner nearby had problems with his machine gun. So he left his machine gun with his ammunition man. He crawled to my position and said to me, Marian, can you help me? My machine gun, which was exactly the same model that was mine, fires only single shots, refuses to fire serious. Could you help me? I said, yes, I'll be happy to. So I gave my machine gun to my ammunition man, and I crawled with him to his machine gun. And I had an idea what was the problem. I adjusted that, pulled the trigger, gun fired beautifully. I got so self-conscious about this and so happy that I did something that others couldn't do. And there was a little pile of dirt that was probably marking the border line with another farm, or the corner of the border line. And my best advice, I put my machine gun that I fix on that pile, and I aim at that windmill from which fire was coming. And I fired. At the same time, the fire came from there, and about 10 inches low, and threw dirt into my face. And blinded by the dirt in my eyes, I pulled the gun down. More fire came. but all missed me. If the German gunner fired just a tiny bit above, I would have never been here to tell the story. That's how close I came to death. Another time, we've been disarming German guards that guarded a bridge, strategic bridge. There were 2 guards on one side of the bridge and 2 guards at the end of the bridge. We halted a train, boarded the train wearing German uniforms. And on the one end, 2 of our men jumped to disarm the guards. They were together. So both of them jumped, and we saw the Germans raising their hands and giving their guns. We're full of enthusiasm. Well, when we came to the other end of the bridge, my friend was to jump the guard on the left, because they were divided. He stood on the one side of the tracks, and was stood on the other side of the tracks. And as I held my rifle and shouted, "Hände hoch," the guard, it was cool in October or November, he had his hat and his earrings up down and his winter coat, the collar up. And he kept his hand to keep warm under his winter coat. When I shouted, "Hände hoch," he started to lift up his hand, pull out the pistol, fired the whole magazine at me before I pulled the trigger, and he fell down. None of the bullets hit me except one, my right or left ear. He was aiming in my head, but he was so nervous. Each time he fired, he missed. That was very close, wasn't it? That was very close. When the Russians came, they wanted us to subordinate ourselves to their government. We refused. So our units in force of division moved across the front. I was on a patrol that determined which was the best way to cross the front between the Germans and the Soviets. And then we fought the Nazis behind their lines until the very end. Then we were forced to return home to Poland that was supposed to be free, but one occupation replaced the other occupation. And we found ourselves to be enemies of the communist system. And most of our men were arrested and sent to Siberia. Some were shot. And for some reason, I sensed that my time was coming to be arrested. I decided to continue my education. And I enrolled in high school, far away from home. And for some reason, I managed to hide. But I slept with a pistol, Walter, under my pillow every single night. And if there was a commotion in the area, I grabbed my pistol and ran into the orchard. I stayed with my uncle, Alexander, attending high school. High school were only in large cities at that time. And I managed to complete high school without being bothered by communists. And then went to college in another city. And after completing my college studies, I enrolled in the seminary, 5-year program in philosophy and theology. I was ordained priest. A revolution developed in Poland in 1956 that they called a frozen revolution. All of us graduate students joined the students there and demonstrated against the communist government. Russians that were advisors to Polish government decided to go back to the Soviet Union. They were scared of the nation, ready to throw them out. At that time, I applied for passport and visa. And my uncle Anthony sent me invitation, paid for my tickets. And I decided to continue my studies at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. After I received my doctorate at the Catholic University, I was invited to teach theology and canon law in a seminary, St. John Vianney Seminary. And I taught in the seminary for 9 years. And during that time, I decided to marry my wife. She was in graduate school at Duquesne University, working on her master's degree in education. And I was teaching undergraduates, and we took just a few days to get married privately. Deep under, I felt that God called me to teach Christianity. Bishop Campbell and then Bishop Atkinson invited me to join the Episcopal Diocese of West Virginia. And then I decided to dedicate myself totally to the ministry. I enjoy writing all the time and always reflecting and thinking and studying day in, day out. The day doesn't go without me studying theology and law and philosophy and writing. So that's probably part of my genes. And I couldn't do anything other than that. What I am, that's what I am. My prejudice, that was caused by the Nazis' crimes in Poland, execution, burning villages, killing innocent people, men, women, and children, throwing children into the flames of their houses and all that. But we were anti-Nazi, not anti-German. The Nazis were the culprits. The German people were deceived and also found themselves in a situation without exit. Had to put up with Hitler and the Hitlerites So as I reflected and worked with people of different backgrounds, you know, I lost the prejudice. So Christianity is the healing, remedial thing for humanity, and even for people like myself and others who suffered from the Nazism and communism. Such have illiterate people to come to power because they see only one side, and the reality has so many different sides. And you learn this when you study the history of human race, history of civilizations, the ancient Babylonian, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Chinese, and other civilization, Indian. You discover quite a bit, things that harm and things that benefit human race. So education, solid education, rounded education is a key to successful nations and successful political systems. And my study of languages led me to the conclusion that most of the wars originated from misunderstandings, because in each language they see things partially. Only educated people, as Plato said in the Republic, philosophers should be leaders of nations. So they see very different aspects of reality, not just one side, as languages see one-sidedly, but universally. But we should glorify people who invented medicine, who invented art that brings peace to the world, the healers, the poets, the scientists, the astronomers, the philosophers. We should build monuments to them, not to the warlords. And we should teach in our schools that not the one that kicks the ball or shoots the gun is the most important, but the one that brings peace, that brings healing, that brings guidance to the nations. Those are to be glorified and respected highly. Happiness is very difficult to define. I experience many types of happiness. Happiness that is more of secular nature, such as success in sports or success in career, teaching, writing. But most of all, my happiness, and the greatest perhaps of them, was the happiness of ministry, of serving Christ and trying to make other people happy by hearing people's confession and encouraging them to go on and do the best in life and straighten out their life and restore their families, convince the children to return to parents, to fathers and mothers when they ran away, convince the wives to return to their husbands and husbands to their wives, to see the families together loving one another. That always gave me a lot of happiness. I experienced happiness that was so-called spiritual happiness, supernatural happiness, after delivering sermons, preparing sermons, envisioning the impact of sermons on the people. One of my happiest days was the day of my ordination to the priesthood, and the wedding day with my dear wife. And one of the greatest happiness was to see our children being born and look into their misty eyes as they came out of the mother's womb in the nursery, and see our son Joseph first with flat nose coming from mother's womb, and Marian smiling. The first thing he did when he was born, he just smiled from ear to ear. He was happy to be born into this world. Those were the moments of happiness. I was quite happy to see my first book being published a long time ago. Happy to receive my first doctorate at the University of Krakow. Happy to receive my doctorate at the Catholic University. Happy to graduate from philosophy graduate school and receive my degree. Those are the happiness in life that I can count. But most of all, my closeness to Christ and closeness to God, that gives me happiness beyond description, beyond understanding. You can feel it, but you cannot quite define it, because you have to experience it to know what I'm talking about. And perhaps because of such experiences, the Lord gave me good health and long and happy life. And I am interested in everything around me. I don't leave a stone unturned, because I want to see what's underneath. And that's a philosophical approach, because philosophy is a science which examines everything in its ultimate causes, as deep as you can go. That's philosophical approach, and I understand that philosophy and theology give happiness to people, because you don't leave stones unturned. That's symbolically speaking. So I always have dictionaries around me. I always analyze etymologically the meaning of words in many languages. And I'll probably die that way. Never a dull moment in my life. Always interested in this beautiful world around that God gave us, a paradise that we live in, that sometimes we do not appreciate enough. In the Polish language, happiness means good luck. Religion always brought light to my intellect. And many a time when I was composing my sermons or articles that I wrote, and I didn't have much ideas just blank. I'll fall on my knees and pray for a moment. And all of a sudden, a light came to my mind and ideas developed. One, Louis Pasteur, a great scientist, French scientist, used to say, when people admire his faith, his religion, they said, how in the world, you being such a great scientist, such a practicing Catholic? And he says, my studies made me to have a faith of a French farmer. But if I studied more, my faith would have been that of a French farm woman. That is even much deeper. That's what religion does to your intellect. I believe that if I were born again, I would become a priest again and have undergone the studies that I did and the work that I did that was most satisfactory, teaching the seminarians, teaching undergraduates at Penn State University, and be more loving to the people that I taught. The longer I taught, the more understanding I became towards my students, and discovered that they perform better for me if I gave them a little bit of encouragement and a little notch higher grade. Also, more understanding to fellow priests that failed somehow in education. I regret one thing that I neglected to complete my law degree at Duquesne University. I felt that I may go off my line as a priest. When I become a lawyer, may become greedy and dishonest. So I decided to interrupt my law studies at Duquesne University. Mahatma Gandhi practiced law after he graduated from Oxford in South Africa. So I regret, if I stay a couple of more years, I could have gotten a degree, but perhaps it would have hurt my spiritual life. So I decided not to continue. And so Joseph is taking a pre-law exam, Princeton pre-law exam, may go into law school at West Virginia University. So he'll get my books, case books. Otherwise, I don't see how different my life would have been. I did the best I could, as all of us do, you know. We're not perfect, but my life has been a joy. just wonderful experience. Well, I hope that I will live long enough to see my grandchildren and look into their eyes before I die. And another thing that I wish they could continue studying and never stop studying, because education is the key to success. I am the happiest man in the world because of the studies that I have undertaken during my lifetime, and I'm studying constantly. A great philosopher and scientist that was born in France, Pascal, said, "Il ne suffit d'être catholique pour être sauvé. Il faut encore rendre témoignage à la vérité." That's something which I always believed in, and knowledge is the key to success in life. It makes me so excited. I wait every morning to get up and go behind the computer and do some creative writing. And I think that's success, the key to success, to happiness. Always be active to the very end. And I hope that I die at the altar, preaching and celebrating Mass. I will never give up. And I bless all the grandchildren that we don't have yet, but in potential, and wish them the best, but most of all to be open to God, to people, and to the world that is so beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you now and forevermore. Amen. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, descendat super vos et maneat semper. Amen.